Welcome back. We've been trying to understand teleological theories of mental content. Teleological theories offer one way of working out causal theories of mental content, which are themselves just one proposal for how we can explain intentional content, aboutness, as a feature of the natural world, rather than as something that must be added to it. Teleological theories offer one way to answer the question, which causal relations are the right ones? We didn't spend much time discussing objections to causal theories in general, nor to the overall project of naturalizing intentionality. You can be sure that not everyone thinks these theories are plausible, and some people think the whole project is a wild goose chase. But here we're going to consider some objections that are specific to teleological theories, a special case of a special case. As is often the case, considering the objections is not just important because they ultimately succeed or fail, though you can draw your own conclusions about that. More importantly for our purposes, the objections highlight what a successful theory must achieve. In the paper you read, Karen Neander considers 4 kinds of objections: novel concepts, non-existent objects, functional indeterminacy, and swampland. We've already mentioned the issue of novel concepts. There just hasn't been enough time in evolutionary history of human beings for there to be any natural selection for us interacting with cars, airplanes, televisions, or iPhones. So it's obviously not the case that being an indicator for those things specifically could be a selected effect function, the teleological function of any brain state of human beings. As Neander emphasizes, teleological functionalists can accommodate this objection in a number of ways. In the earlier lesson, I pointed to 2 options, arguing that the selected effect function belongs to the system for acquiring concepts or mental states rather than to the individual mental states. I suggested that the fine-tuning of the function depends on development and learning rather than natural selection in a species. There are still details to be worked out, but the general idea is clear enough. The second objection has to do with mental states about things that don't exist. This is a general problem for naturalizing intentionality, for explaining intentionality in terms of other natural relations in the world. Some things that I can think about are things to which I don't stand in any obvious natural relations. One way this can happen is when my thoughts are very abstract. How can we say that my thoughts about justice resemble justice or are caused by justice? If there is such a thing as justice, it's some kind of abstract thing or property, and it's hard to see how it could cause or resemble any physical things in the world. Matters are only worse when it comes to things like unicorns and Santa Claus that don't exist at all. The solution to this problem is to build up intentional content about abstract or non-existent things out of simpler bits of content about things that do exist. Maybe my thoughts about justice are built up out of thoughts about how people treat one another. Maybe my thoughts about unicorns are built up out of thoughts about horses and horns. And maybe my thoughts about Wonder Woman are built up out of my thoughts about women, warriors, heroes, and so on. So most philosophers are not too worried about this second problem. The third problem has caused more trouble for naturalized theories of intentionality in general and for teleological theories in particular. This problem has to do with the determinacy of thought. It surely seems to us that our thoughts are fully determinate, or at least they can be. I can have beliefs about Taylor Swift specifically, and they're about her rather than about someone else who looks like her, sounds like her, or pretends to be her. Even if she's replaced by an evil doppelganger, my beliefs about Taylor are still about her, and not about her doppelganger, even if it happens that my Swiftie beliefs are sometimes caused by the doppelganger. And it's not just about Taylor. It's also about Wonder Woman and Diana Prince, and about triangles. I can have beliefs about triangles, and I can think about them as such, as being closed geometric figures with 3 interior angles. But I can also have beliefs about trilaterals, and I can think about them as being closed geometric figures with 3 sides. But no amount of development or natural selection can sort out the similarity or causal relations between me and triangles or trilaterals, because every triangle is a trilateral and vice versa. So my thoughts seem to be more fine-grained and determinate than any merely causal or resemblance relations. How can that be? There are several well-known solutions to the problem of functional indeterminacy. the problem of explaining how we can have fully determinate mental content. The best known solution, as Neander explains, is due to Ruth Millikan. Millikan's solution is to solve the problem of determinacy by appeal not just to the functions of the thing that carries or transmits information, but also the functions of things that use the information. Consider the famous example that Neander discusses on pages 561 to 562 of a frog that flicks its tongue out to catch flies. The snapping behavior is caused by certain things that the frog sees. The frog snaps at flies, yes, but it also snaps at BBs, shadows, and other fly-like things. So, shall we say the frog snaps at flies, or fly-like things, or little dark spots? That is, shall we say that the intentional contents of the frog's perceptual states are flies, or BBs, or dark spots, or what? Or is the frog's perceptual content simply not determinate in that way? Millikan's answer is that the frog perceives flies, and sometimes misperceives flies when it responds to BBs, dark spots, shadows, and such. What makes the frog's perceptual mental states about flies, according to Millikan, is that those states are used by the froggy cognitive system to cause feeding behaviors. The frog's perception has the function of causing feeding, and was selected for by natural selection because its effect was to enable eating. Because the perception was selected to enable eating, we can determine that, among all the things the frog perception might be about, it's the nutrition-related one that's the content of those perceptual states. Flies and BBs might look the same to the system that produces the frog's perceptual states, but they're very different when it comes to digestion and nutrition. They're very different when it comes to how that perceptual state is used. Millikan turns our attention to the use, or as she puts it, the consumption of mental states. This is how she proposes to solve the problem of determinacy. The last but best known objection to teleological theories of mental content is the so-called swamp man objection. Remember, according to teleological functionalists, what makes a mental state the kind of state it is and gives it the intentional content that it has is, roughly, that the state or the system of which it's a part have a teleological function to indicate or carry information. And the notion of teleological function that's embraced by most teleological functionalists is an etiological one, and that's a fancy way of saying that it depends on the history of the thing. So whether something has a certain etiological function, a teleological function in this sense, depends not just on how it is now, but also how things were in the past. In the case of Neander's selected effect account, for example, whether something has a certain teleological function now depends on whether the trait was selected for by natural selection in the past. And that depends on whether and how that trait increased the fitness of the ancestors of the things we're now considering. Of course, how things are now and how they were in the past are different matters. This is good news for teleological functionalists because they can use this difference to explain certain kinds of error. If a trait of mine fails to do what things of its type did in my ancestors, I can still say that it has that function even if it doesn't actually produce that effect. So we can say, for example, that a heart has the function of pumping blood even if it ceases to do that, for example, due to injury or disease. In those cases, we can say the heart is still a heart, but it's malfunctioning. The flip side is that something that lacks the specified history could nevertheless produce the effects that were selected for in those things that have the history. Artificial hearts can pump blood, but they weren't selected by natural selection for their blood pumping effects, so they don't have the etiological function of blood pumping. As a practical matter, this is rather handy and extremely important. Clinicians and patients are very excited about the possibility of replacing diseased parts of their bodies with working parts, and the supply and characteristics of such parts would be greatly improved if they could be grown in a lab or manufactured in a factory. So, the existence of functional duplicates that don't have to be created by evolutionary history would be very useful. But now we have a problem. Does a physical duplicate of something have the same teleological functions as the original? The basic answer is no. The duplicate does not have the history that the original has. The duplicate, imagining for example that it was produced in a factory, has no ancestors at all. So it has no selected effect or teleological functions at all. Suppose that, Just as I'm teaching this lesson, I'm struck by lightning and vaporized. I'm completely destroyed. But, quite by coincidence, the lightning also causes the materials around me, these were swamp gases in the original story, it causes these materials around me to coalesce into a being that's indistinguishable from me, the one who was destroyed moments before. Now, this being, this so-called swamp man, just came into existence a moment ago, this very instant. It has no educational, developmental, or evolutionary history because it has no history at all. Of course, being my exact duplicate, right down to the molecules if you like, Swamp Man looks and acts just like I would have done. But according to the teleological theory, having mental states like beliefs and desires, and having the particular beliefs and desires that I have, depends on having a particular evolutionary, developmental, and educational history. Swamp Man has none of those. So Swamp Man, on this view, has no beliefs or desires at all. Swamp Man is a special case of a kind of objection that we've considered before, the problem of functional duplicates. What do you think? Is Swamp Man possible? And if so, is the possibility of Swamp Man a big problem for teleological theories of mental content?